Hello and welcome to the latest in the series of events from Neurodiversity in Business. My name is Dan Harris. I'm the founder and CEO of NiB. And I must say today I'm absolutely delighted. I was talking to my mum this morning and she said, you know, what are you doing today? And I said to her, it's like the equivalent of a guy from Peterborough playing with Pele from the Brazilian team in the World Cup of '76. So without further ado, I'll introduce you to Judy Singer. Everyone will know who Judy is. She's the founder of the Neurodiversity movement, and it's a massive honour to be with you here today. Welcome, Judy.
Oh, thank you so much. I don't know about my football skills. I think you'll find me a bit disappointing. Pele is a footballer, right?
Pele was the best footballer ever in the world. He was a Brazilian. Amazing.
Oh, wow. Okay, I've got a lot to live up to then. Thanks.
You do. So before I hand over to Judy, and I'm acutely conscious, no one is here to hear me speak. Everyone wants to know what you want to talk about today, Judy. We've got basically a discussion which will be around generally how do we as participants help build neuroinclusive society, and that would constitute workplaces, the corporate world where NiB focuses, but also wider society. So we've got a few questions which I'll throw out to you, Judy. It's going to be pretty informal and relaxed. And then at the end, if you're okay, we'd like to take questions from our audience. And I think that's often the most interesting things, isn't it? When you get thrown out questions that maybe we weren't expecting and put us on the spot.
Well, I do really like curly questions. I find it very stimulating. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that too.
Excellent. Okay, well, the first question, and this has actually come from the NiB membership really, is around that difficult and sometimes contentious topic around language. As you alluded to very early on when you defined the language and the movement, it's evolved, hasn't it? And usage has changed. So we'd love to just understand a little bit more from you where your original conception came around the term neurodiversity and what you think of following the various debates in our community around usage of language.
Yes, well, I think as you said, the language has evolved and I don't actually own it, but I do like to put my oar in for my original concept because I think it makes sense and I think it's linguistically logical, and I'll tell you why. So my initial concept was, first of all, I didn't define it. I just thought, oh, self-evident what it means, and apparently it's self-evident differently to different people. But my interpretation, was first of all to give a banner name, I guess, or a call to action name for this emerging movement founded by the autistic self-advocacy, or rather not founded, but pioneered by the autistic self-advocacy movement. And it was becoming obvious that we used to call ourselves autistics and they were cousins. So that was the DISs and the ADHDs. That's mainly what we were talking about. So it obviously needed a group name because we had so many issues in common while not losing our individual characteristics. And of course, nowadays, all those conditions overlap anyway. So yeah, so definitely a name for a movement. And then secondly, to add to what we used to call, we just called intersections of class, ethnicity, race, disability, gender, all those things. And now it's called intersectionality, which I wasn't aware of at the time. I just do want to say that people can get very hung up about intersectionality and what a terrible thing it is and everything. But you know what? Every time you do a census, what's the government asking? What's your class? What's your income level? Your gender, disability, etc. So it's really a tool of government for distributing resources. And so I wanted that to get right because we were not recognised. I mean, at that time, there was only intellectual disability, physical disability, and mental illness. That was all. And we were not that. So that's where it started. And then where it has evolved to is that a lot of people think it's a shorthand for neurological difference. And I think that's a real problem, because neurodiversity is based on biodiversity, and diversity is actually a measurement of the amount of variable in a place. It refers to a place. It cannot refer to an individual. You can't say Skippy's just a kangaroo, but her little limping Joey is biodiverse, you know, and it doesn't work. Same with ethnic diversity. You can't say Mary is just us, but Maria is ethnically diverse. So because it's othering. And to me, I guess in my mind, the neurodiversity movement, I wasn't thinking people would focus on it as a biological thing. It was politically a thing. Biodiversity was a coin for political purposes in the 80s to argue for the conservation of species. And in the same way, for me, it was a political term, and it was pointing to the importance and necessity of diversity for creativity, sustainability, and all those positives. So if we lose that, if we start to turn it into them and us again, neurodiverse people, and not, you know what, my favorite term now, I used to say it was neuro-minority because to signal that it's a political term. And okay. I'm thinking if it wasn't so clunky, it would be neuro-labeled, but neuromedically labeled, and neuro not yet labeled, because they haven't thought of anything yet, but soon, you know, there'll be a profession in it. So that's where I'm at. But again, I know I don't own it. I'm just putting my oar in, and I jump on people when they get it wrong if I'm in a bad mood.
Well, look, that's really interesting, and I think it's helpful to bring it to life, because I've read all of your stuff and I understand it from a theoretical point of view, but it's great for you to kind of talk us through that lineage. There's been a lot of debate on the NiB LinkedIn page, for example, around the term neurodivergence and whether people are comfortable with that as it describes themselves. Obviously, it needs to be very individual-led, and everyone will have a different perspective. But what's your kind of take on the discussion point around the term neurodivergence and a neurodivergent individual?
Well, you know, divergent from what? You know, for me, it's probably the best term if you don't want to be political. But it does take you back to a more medical model, which is another thing. You know, I don't know if your viewers know about. I mean, everyone knows about the social model. So I think, should I explain it?
Please do, because we'd love to hear it directly from you.
Well, this is the standard formula that the medical model is what's wrong with this individual and how do we fix it? And the social model is what is wrong with society. Wrong's probably not the right word, but how can we change society to make it better for this individual? Now, I'm a sociologist, and so I started from the social model of disability, which is pioneered in America and the UK. But, you know, very quickly I found it, I don't like extremes. I'm kind of a centrist. Very quickly, if you read my work, you might see in there that I got to the point where I thought that the social model was so determined to biology, or essentialism as they called it, that it was almost creationist. They might have, you know, sometimes I felt like I was in a kind of creationist revival meeting, some of our things. So I'm a centrist. I believe in the best of both worlds. And on top of that, the idea that I most, and probably didn't emphasize enough because I had so much to cover and I only had 15,000 words to do it in for my thesis, was a kind of ethnicity model, or a minority model, if you like, which was pioneered by the deaf people, who said, we don't have a disability, we're a linguistic or language minority. And I thought, oh, yeah, that's a good one. They call themselves a deaf nation. And I thought, yes, that's what we are. But again, I'm not dismissing disability. You know, we know there's the spectrum is now incredibly broad. Some might say too broad. I might say it myself from time to time. And it, at best, it's like an identity that, you know, it could have, when we started, there were, the hierarchy was geeks, nerds, autistics. No, geeks, nerds, Aspies, and autistics. That was the hierarchy, the spectrum. Then it just, now we're all jumbled into autism because of the DSM-5, which they did not consult anybody, and there was a lot of opposition to that initially. So,
and look, I think we're never one to shy away from controversy and contention within neurodiversity in business, and we'd love to explore that topic with you. So let's talk about that spectrum point then, because you've seen that evolution, haven't you, in terms of categorization of individuals and how broad the spectrum is. Would you mind just expanding a little bit about where you've seen that evolution, please?
You mean where I see it going, or where?
Yeah, where was it originally, and what's changed over the last kind of 10 to 15 years there?
Well, initially there was classical autism, and then the DSM-4 added Asperger's syndrome, which was basically, they saw it as autism without intellectual disability. And they said that it was a spectrum. Now, we all like that spectrum idea because it broadened people's thinking that disability is not measles, either you've got spots or you haven't, but that there is a whole spectrum. So that was the initial idea, and it was a good idea. But we all said at the time, you know, I'm talking 1997, 98, when I was writing my thesis and doing it online with international groups. Sorry, this is what happens with me. I've got mild cognitive decline. That's because of my age. And you can put that in because, you know, that's my major diversity at the moment. So I've kind of lost my thread. You might have to, you can cut some of this out if you want, but you might have to remind me where I'd got to. Sorry if you...
No, I was following it very well. So you were talking about, well, I asked the question around that evolution of the spectrum and your perspective on how broad it is, and the previous situation where people were categorized a bit more. But I think where you were going, you were going to tell us, you were going to expand on your views around how recently everything's been clumped together again. I think that's where you were going.
Yeah. And so that's right. I think I was saying the spectrum idea was a step forward, we thought, but we knew it wasn't. We knew it was clusters of behaviors. And we also, then there's that word neurotypical. No one was really happy with that, but it was just there as an antithesis to what our movement was trying to achieve. So I think a lot of the conflict that's happening now and anger is about what the DSM-5 did, because you know, some people, you know, some autistic people don't like being autistic. That's their choice too. They know their lives better than anyone else. There's also this whole issue of mild, moderate, and severe, which is now called, what is it, level 1, level 2, and level 3. I mean, you're not fooling anyone, right? It's this sort of language thing. But to me, I've been thinking about it, and yes, okay, look, it's low support needs, medium support needs, high support needs. But really, what is the level about? It's about how much time a carer has to give. And so that is not about how people might self-identify, but I do have to say something about the anti-parent stuff that happens in all new social movements.
Please do.
So, you know, there's a lot of blame the mother, for instance, you know, people who think they're feminists, and then there's autism mums. To me, you know, I get a bit ballistic when I see that. If you ask, you know, I don't think, looking at Twitter, I don't think I've got many parents who are followers, because, you know, because their lived experience might be different from their children's. So yeah, and I think that's all part of the evolution of a movement, in that, you know, basic sort of sociology is, you know, up comes this great new idea, and then it doesn't fit everyone. So there's an antithesis and there's a lot of, friction, and then it all will settle down. So that's how it's going to evolve. And that's where free speech comes in, where it's good for everybody to be able to speak the truth without being silenced or attacked.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Really, really interesting. And I've definitely taken away a few thoughts to ponder there. Thank you, Judy. The next question that we've had from within our membership at NiB has been around, what would a neuroinclusive world look like? And what are the essential foundations for that world? And that's a really tricky question. And we're putting you on the spot a lot, Judy, and we've not allowed you any time to prepare any answers to these questions. But we'd love to get your thoughts on, how do you see a response on that topic?
Okay, so I think about that a lot. And so in the future world, we're looking at an ideal situation in the future world. And my first thought was, is that pre or post-apocalypse? Because things are going to be very different. And I'm only half joking because, I think embedded in that question is people want to know how it's going to be if everything else remains the same. But I don't think everything else is going to remain the same. Nevertheless, I will address it as if tomorrow, bang, because I am the fairy godmother of neurodiversity. I wave my wand and everything is the way I want it. So, look, do you mind if I just put on my glasses here? I can't quite see you properly. You can edit that out, or it can add a human touch. Okay.
We'll leave it in, don't worry.
Okay. All right. So assuming everything remains the same, so from a political point of view, which is where I'm coming from, actually I can say it in two phrases, and it's in an ideal world, it's actually a bit of a catchphrase, is it's from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. Does that compute? In other words, in an ideal society, we want to give people what they need, and we have to know their individual needs, and we also have to we can't expect more or less from people who have something to give. So that's ideal. Now, that's never going to be realized, but that's what we've got to strive for. So that's it in one sentence. And that wrongly attributed that quote to Karl Marx, but it did come from the French post-revolutionary period, or 19th century. So that sums it up, idealism. But looking at the current reality is that there's always going to be more. No, well, I'm not going to say there's always going to be more. At the moment, there's vastly more neurodivergent people unemployed than employed. And I've got a bad memory for statistics, but most people, those amounts are always floating around. And so the bottom line is no person left behind. Again, an ideal that we must strive towards, and that begins with the social welfare reform. And I'm not going to use the word welfare. It's about charity. It's not charity, it's social security, it's insurance that we all pay in our taxes in case something goes wrong and people can't make a living of their own. So that punitive system must end because, well, it's obvious. It's inhumane, and okay, so it's a moral imperative, but also there are so many hidden costs when you mistreat people, the mental illness costs that come along. So from a purely pragmatic point of view, so that's the first thing. Next thing is when people are unemployed, they often are very happy to volunteer because it gets them out. they can't get a job, but at least they're out in society. So that's a very vexed question. Because I was a carer, my career ended. I was working in IT. I was doing quite well. I can't say I liked it, but I was doing okay. And then I became a carer, and that was impossible. And I did a lot of volunteering. And I was on a lot of committees, and I ended up in a lot of high-level committees. And I enjoyed it. But at the same time, I'm still at the mercy, as I still am, because I live in public housing and I live on an age pension. I'm at the mercy of this awful bureaucracy. So what I'm proposing for people for the next tier is, if people want to volunteer, there should be a tier, a volunteer tier, and an additional payment. This is, again, ideal. No government will want to do this, that's for sure, but it is a government responsibility. And of course, where they're going to pay for it, from the taxes of the people at the top. Third tier is paid, people who are employed, more money.
Is this, Judy, akin to the concept around a universal basic income?
I was just about to say that. I have it written in great big letters, UBI. I have not heard anything. I've been studying it. The far right don't like it. You're mollycoddling people. The far left don't like it. I couldn't believe this. The only argument really is that it'll make people too comfortable and they won't want to create the revolution. So I don't think that's a good idea. And then, so I think it's a good idea. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think a number of economists are coming round to this, not from the kind of anything to do with neurodiversity, but actually the rise of automation and robotics, particularly over that 30 to 50 year horizon, will likely mean that a significant number of those jobs that people have disappeared. So if we are based on a consumerist society and economy, who's going to be buying the goods if those people aren't generating any income? So
exactly. Yeah. So, a lot of the economics we've been enthralled to has now proven because I studied economics, one of the many things I did and then dropped out of in the 60s, 70s. And all these critiques of what was about to happen were already there, climate change, all of it. And now it's happened. And so, we've got to learn from that, because things just aren't going to be business. I don't see how they can be business as usual. And in terms of, I was in IT right at the beginning. When I was first started as a computer programmer, it was hanging chads and, you had to type punch cards. And everyone was saying, oh, now we're ushering in a new age of leisure. And I thought, no, we're not, because our religion is work ethic. You're not really valuable unless you work. And we've got that ingrained. It's simply not true. There's not enough work for everybody, but people do want to participate. They want to be doing something meaningful, and that's the volunteer tier. So I know it's complicated. We haven't got time to go into this, but so that's my idea. And at the top, there are people on high salaries and they need to pay their taxes, and in the countries where they earn it. For instance, I'm very acutely aware of that in the Southern Hemisphere, because we're importing costs and exporting profits here.
Right. Understood. Well, that's been really informative, Judy. Thanks for setting out.
The other thing, sorry, there's more.
Please.
I knew there was something. Then there's the whole issue of women. And another one of my experiences, I started the world's first support group for people with autistic parents. And guess what? I used to call us daughters of engineers sometimes, but actually the fathers were really, mostly in the US, a few in the UK, they were the establishment of America, the doctors, the lawyers, the professors, the logicians, all of that. And their mothers were slowly going mad at home. And that's, I had about 200 members, and that was the story. That was the story of my mother. She was the autistic one. My father was the carer. So anyway, we're not doing enough. And to me, a lot of people really secretly think neurodiversity means male computer programmers. Well, no. just know, and I guess we'll talk more about what corporations can do, but definitely that in their annual report, you know, I've looked, maybe I haven't seen everything in the UK or whatever, but there ought to be a breakdown by gender of who's being employed and what efforts are being made.
Right, yeah, and you know, the I can only talk for UK and Europe, but there's definitely that movement around gender balance and pay gap reporting. But you're absolutely right, there's nothing there around neurodiversity yet, and more importantly, like you're saying, that intersectionality of gender balance with ND, that's a few years.
And all the other things, you know, I mean, everyone, in terms of identity politics, everyone's sort of going to prioritise what's important to them. People of colour, for me, it's being female and disabled and low income. That's my three.
Right.
There's the whole thing, and that is going to change. And but I've also noticed here that the corporations are starting to do all that. I don't know if they are in the UK, but without even knowing the word particularly, it is starting to happen.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you, Judy. That was a really interesting view and understanding around what ideal neuroinclusive society or world might look like. Can I flip this on its head for a second, and let's focus on the negatives, the constraints, the inhibitors. So what do you think are those social beliefs and practices which are really holding us back? What do you see as the fundamentals?
I'm afraid to mention the C word. And because if I mention the C word and you know what it is, they're going to think I'm the other C word. There are people who've accused me of the other C word. So capitalism, communism. I mean, first of all, this belief that we can have unlimited growth. And I was just thinking, I just remembered that, you know, when people, there was a time, I don't know if it's still going, but there was this discourse from psychologists about if corporations were people, they'd be classified as psychopaths, and you know, each for everyone, every man, every corporation for themselves, sort of thing. But at the same time, most people that I know who actually work in corporations really want change themselves.
Judy, you were telling us just now about your beliefs around what the social barriers are and inhibitors towards towards getting towards that neuroinclusive world. Please just continue expanding on your thoughts there.
Okay, so I was just thinking that in terms of the situation, the belief system we're operating through, or the governments are forced to operate through, is being neoliberalism. And I'm thinking about the employment situation where what between an employee, a neurodivergent employee, and a business that hires them is kind of a win-win situation. But for all those people who didn't get the job, between the it's a zero-sum game for every job that a neurodivergent person gets, because they're better and sharper. Someone else is going to miss out and fall back on the social security system, which I've already talked about. So that's the first thing. The fact that people are so still locked into this work ethic that everyone's got to work is really detrimental. It's people, well, I guess I'm repeating myself, but it is important that people need the space to find themselves. Not everyone's going to be able to work. People who have got very high support needs can't work. Some people, creatives, you know, need time to gestate, and governments are not game to make these sorts of changes. And I've just been, I heard a very interesting talk on Australian television. It's he's his name is Adam Carell. He's a partner for diversity and sustainability at EY. And so he's put out a report, which I'll be able to send you. I think I mentioned it already on LinkedIn. And some of these changes are already happening. One of the things he talks about is the thing about having to convince people at the top over and over again that it's how to turn it into a win-win situation when they say, oh, so it's only about profits. And it's very hard. I mean, I don't know how we can change from that, particularly when, you know, we've, like, I said this in a talk with someone else the other day, that the thing about neurodiversity is it's kind of liberal, it's liberal individualism on steroids. You know, every single person is unique. How sustainable is that when we're up against the despotic economies like China and Russia? So, you know, I'm not saying it's easy. So they are the barriers. And then, of course, intersectional barriers and just all the other things like this. When some people get jobs and others don't, it sometimes feels like, you know, sort of musical deck chairs on the Titanic, where, you know, one person gets in, but the pie is not growing, the jobs pie is not growing. So there's some of the things.
Got it. Great. Well, thank you for answering that. We've got about probably 10 minutes left before we'll throw it across to the audience for some Q&A, which I'm really looking forward to. And actually, the topic that I was most interested in hearing your expert views on is what's the actual role of businesses in turning neuroinclusion into a win-win situation. So, and Judy, you never do, but please don't hold back. I think our corporate membership really want to hear this directly. How can we move from those tokenistic tick box exercises, which sometimes could appear to be PR for PR purposes? How can we move this into being truly inclusive and systemic? That's what I'd love to hear from you on.
Okay, well, I was thinking about this, and what I really thought of was that my first thought was, I know that people want really practical things. That's what most people are really interested in, and that's not what sociologists do. We're here to nag and criticize, and yes. So I'm thinking a lot of this, you know, my first thought is go and ask an organizational psychologist about all these practical things, because, you know, they've got, well, it's obvious, I don't have to tell you why. You know, the thing is, a lot of these things, so actually you're not asking me how businesses can treat employees. You're asking me how, well, oh, good. Yes, that's easy.
Exactly. So I'm, you know, for example, with neurodiversity in business, I've positioned this as we can help change the world by showing society that corporates can lead here. So you're right. I wasn't asking at a micro level what those kind of good practice are, but I'm just macro. How can business and corporate world actually be leaders in this space?
Well, it probably goes back to things I've already discussed. First of all, you've got to prove that it works, and you've got to. There's a lot of Pollyanna thinking around neurodiversity at the moment, and I prefer the word panglossy, and he was male. Pangloss. He was the original Pollyanna. People who've read Voltaire might know that. And, you know, so yes, there's a lot of that going around, which goes with all new social movements. It's suddenly everything's right with us, and society is totally wrong. So it's not going to be easy, but it's also, again, it's a win-win in terms of what the corporation wants to achieve, which is workers that are happy and productive and not square pegs in round holes. So that's the first part. So proof of concept, I suppose. Is that a term? I'm trying to sound really cool. So that's the first
Judy, you don't need to sound very cool. You are very cool. So we're following you, absolutely.
Oh, I love that. Okay. So that was the first thing. So the next thing is, it goes back to what I said before, pay your taxes in the country that you create your profits so that they can fund alternatives for the people who can't get work. And instead of being, this is like, I know it's very idealistic, but that's what people have been wanting for a long time. And I don't know. Do you have a better idea?
No,
how do you even think this is possible?
I genuinely do, which is why I've set up Neurodiversity in Business, because I've thought for quite some time that actually this is a space where society may lag what corporates do. So if we get this right, and this is a multi-generational fight, so this isn't going to be a 2 or 3 year fix, but if we get this right, we can actually change society's understanding of neurodiversity, but more importantly, their acceptance of the fact that there are benefits and values which through the corporate world leading. Historically, I think it's fair to say that neurodiversity is sat in the too hard to deal with bucket in the corporate world. And where we've made great strides, or good strides, depending on who you're talking to, on sexuality and gender balance, and we're starting on ethnicity and socioeconomic more. Where we've made strides there, we just haven't really significantly improved on ND. But I'm really interested, as a final question, do you think we're pointed in the right direction, Judy? Do you see that change making the right momentum? Do you get frustrated that we're rehashing arguments from decades ago? Where do you think we're at?
Well, I do think we're back at belief systems, and I do throw the ball back at government, that the role of government is to also do the regulation. To me, it just goes back to putting your money where your mouth is, basically. And corporates have got the money. And if they change, they are going to be much more influential on governments. Particularly, I could speak of a certain media monopoly that I might be sued for, so I'm not going to say it, who's done enormous damage to this by pushing the neoliberal sensationalist line. So yeah, look, to me, just give me a moment. You might have to pause for a moment, but don't just cut the next bit out while I'm thinking for a minute. Because I do think about this, how feasible and possible is this? And ultimately, social change happens because of all the experimentation that we do with goodwill and good intentions and careful thought and research and proper monitoring and funding for sociologists to figure out how this all sits together. So it's all part of this emerging discourse, and we can only hope that it's going to pay off. And I've got here this motto that I'm just going to read to you. It might be a good ending. I'll just get it out. You can cut out this bit if you don't like it. So this is an interesting thing. Can you see it? Don't read it to you. It's a little thing that I've got.
Up on screen for the audience, yes.
It says, do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now. You are not obliged to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. And that, oddly enough, happens to be the motto I don't know if I can give a plug, but my great friend and mentor, who's also my birthday twin, Nancy Doyle, that happens to be their motto, and it's always been mine as well. And it comes from the Talmud.
Judy, massively appreciate your time. You've been very generous with us at Neurodiversity in Business, but also with our membership. I'm sure we're going to get some really interesting questions now. So we'll have to get our thinking caps on and get ready for the questions. They'll be coming through on the screen at the bottom, and we'll try to prepare for them over the next couple of minutes. So. Okay, well, thank you to all of our audience, and I'm really pleased to see that we had around kind of 200 people at maximum here. I think you'll all agree, a fantastic insight from the amazing Judy Singer there. Now, as ever with these events, we like to deliver some real insight and allow the audience that participation. So really pleased now to jump into the section whereby Judy will be answering a few questions. Judy will be put on the spot, but I'm sure she's very capable of answering these questions. And actually, really great questions from the audience, really quite insightful ones. So, Judy, if you're ready, I'm going to hit you with the questions. The first one is around the interesting debate that happens within our community around how do we balance between perceiving neurodivergent individuals as ones with superpowers versus those that may need adjustments in society or the workplace? You're on mute at the moment, Judy. Go ahead, Judy.
Yeah, you can hear me now? Okay, so superpowers versus needs. Well, first of all, I mean, neurodiversity basically just says everybody is different. So some people will have superpowers, some people won't. I think the education system is responsible for, and and physios and organizational psychologists, all of these people are the ones that really have to work with individuals. And I do think that the neurodiversity movement is not really about labels and superpowers and who is autistic and who isn't. The labels come from the needs of the welfare system, in that you need to have these labels to get the supports that you need. But actually, it's really about listening to individuals and finding out what their needs are. We do need to move to a needs-based welfare system rather than a label-based welfare system. And I hope that that explains it a little.
Thanks, Judy. That was a really helpful answer. We're not going to make life easier for you, Judy. There's another really taxing question that is very very relevant in the debate around language. So we've been asked by one of the audience, what are your views around the terms neurominority and neuromajority as opposed to neurodivergent and neurotypical? Love to hear your perspective on that, and apologies, it's a very hard question to answer.
Oh no, I love that one. I think I might have said earlier too that neuromajority, minority and majority, they were my preferred terms because they are political terms, and that was what I had in mind initially for neurodiversity, the name for a movement rather than a diagnosis. So neurominority and majority, it emphasizes the political angle of I don't want to use the word fighting, but anyway, of trying to gain civil rights funding for for the accommodation of a more diverse population, whereas neurodivergence, and what was the antithesis there?
Neurotypical.
Neurotypical. Well, neurotypical is a kind of weird sort of word because no one's really typical. Again, everyone is diverse, but it was there as just to counterpose what we were, who the movement was for versus the people who were, I guess, a better fit for society's rather narrow expectations of within the education system and the workplace, for instance. So neurodivergent, I'm not mad keen about it. It does kind of veer more into, the medical model. It's more like, it sort of fades into diagnosis and all that. But, it's really up to the people who, whatever they prefer to be identified by. And I think I might have said this before. I've got a terrible memory, so I'm not sure. But I think I said in some ways I've been thinking of it as that there's just two kinds of people, neuro-labelled and neuro not yet labelled, because sooner or later they're going to find a label for everybody. And really it's down to meeting people's individual needs.
Great, thank you. So that's neuro-labelled and neuro-unlabelled. That's definitely
yet labelled, because
yet to be labelled. Yeah.
If there's an option for another profession, then they'll find something.
Got it. Well, I'm sure that will enter into our lexicon. Thank you for that, Judy. The next question that we've got comes from a lady called Deborah, and she asks, in a fully neuro-inclusive world, will there be any need for diagnosis or labelling? Because wouldn't everyone identify with just being part of a societal spectrum of neurodiversity?
So, well, in an ideal society, in an ideal society, hopefully it'll all be needs-based rather than label-based, and it's going to be more about, I should have had, it's a pity I haven't got the question in front of me. Just hang on a second. Oh, no, I can't. Oh, sorry. So,
would you like me to repeat it briefly?
Repeat it, please.
So in a neuro-inclusive world, will there be any need for diagnosis or labelling? Because wouldn't everyone identify with being just part of that societal spectrum of neurodiversity? Well, the need for diagnosis is, yes, obviously there is, I'm not ever thought that there's no such thing as disability, depending, of course, on what you mean by disability, because some people say, there's this extreme view that it's all socially constructed. But in an ideal society, people will get their needs met, and in that sense, they have to have someone, some kind of expert in whatever it is that they need, that's going to recommend what it is that they need. But that is probably not going to be the medical profession, who actually were Johnny-come-latelys to this whole movement, and who basically were educated by, I think, yes, there were some leading, like Dr. Lorna Wing, who pioneered all this, but a lot of what's known about all these conditions was developed by activists and support groups. And it's really not a medical thing, but it is a thing for the more ancillary professions like physiotherapists and what else? Physiotherapists, psychologists, healthcare workers, community workers, to actually work out with people what it is that their precise needs are, rather than having this all-encompassing label of autism, which is now so broad that a lot of people are getting totally alienated by it. And really the label, I think, as I keep saying, is an artefact of the welfare system. Sorry if I don't look focused, but I can't actually see anybody, or I'm not really looking at anybody, so it's a bit awkward. But yeah, I think it's really doesn't have to go through psychiatrists and the actual medical profession. It can go to many kinds of ancillary professionals.
Great, thank you, Judy. Really helpful answer. We're coming on to our last question from the audience, and it touches on the kind of the development over the last 6 months, I guess, for recording in, for example, LinkedIn, dyslexic strengths. And there's been a lot of debate in our community, actually, how easy is it to quantify and define on an evidential basis what those strengths actually look like, and actually are some of those strengths across the ND spectrum, such as autistic strengths or ADHD strengths. So it's quite a hard and open question to answer, Judy, but just interested in your views around the progression around thinking or talking around dyslexic thinking, for example, which is now a skill on LinkedIn.
Can you just so what are they saying? What's the controversy about dyslexia exactly?
So there's some debate in our community around actually how easy is it to define which are those strengths which are relevant for dyslexia as against other parts of the ND spectrum.
Well, to me, it seems, again, it's not really my area because I don't think much about diagnosis. I'm thinking the bigger picture. For me, it's more like, again, based on the individual. I mean, yes, we hear a lot about strengths and challenges, but not a lot of really accurate definitions or research, and I'm not sure that we need them, because this should come out surely in an interview. There may well be neurological clusters around dyslexia where something else, some other skill is strengthened, visual skills, obviously, or auditory or creative skills in music and all sorts of things. It's just a matter of not getting too hung up on these categories and labels, which, I guess a lot of people are wondering, well, what precisely are the strengths? But I think, again, it's all got to be individual needs and strengths based. And if you're offering a job, and then you're talking to people or watching them dance or watching them sing or watching them create whatever. I don't think I don't really believe in all these kind of minute categories. I hope that answers it. Maybe why would there be a need for that even? I'm thinking that you couldn't work out in an actual interview, or that a teacher couldn't work out in the classroom. I mean, obviously, we're talking about classrooms. There's a lot of different, there could be more choice and support for children to find out what their actual strengths are. It should start there. But it's been like a good 50 years since I've been anywhere near a school, so maybe education systems are more progressive, and in your country, again, it could be different.
Well, we would like to hope so and think so, but I'm not convinced. But Judy, that concludes all of the questions that we've got time for from the audience. Unfortunately, there have been a significantly larger number of questions than we have time, and that I think is indicative of the community's desire to spend time with you and continue learning from you. So I wanted to just conclude by saying how much we value all of your input and leadership on this topic. And I can say from a personal perspective, Judy, I genuinely learn every time I speak with you, and I really treasure those opportunities to debate and understand your perspective on this important topic. So thank you for being so generous with your time. Thank you for the audience, so many people who are dialing in, and for those who have struggle to get in down to technology issues, don't worry, this is going to be recorded. I recognise the irony of talking about this live when they'll only see this on the recording, so we might try and edit out that little section. But thank you so much for everyone who's embraced the concept of neurodiversity. And Judy, you said it best originally when you said neurodiversity is a social movement in its heart, and I know there's so much goodwill around this topic. We within Neurodiversity in Business want to support that. We recognise that we are only a coalition and we are only a collective, and collaboration is absolutely key within our community. So there was no need to join Neurodiversity in Business to be part of this event, but everyone's very welcome to join via the website. There is no cost. And we're just genuinely looking forward to supporting others in this area on the journey ahead. And Judy, you've been such an amazing leader for this topic for so many years. And finally, just to conclude with another note of appreciation, thank you for all of your hard work here, Judy.
Well, thank you very much for giving me a forum. I've really enjoyed it. And it's just been lovely to be here. Thank you. And I look forward to seeing all interesting webinars. And I'd love to see the list of everything that everyone asked, just to see what's out there and what people are thinking about. You know, it would be great to see a lot more questions.
Absolutely. We'll commit to sharing those questions with you. And just as final note for the audience and also for the members of NIB, our next session for the membership, the corporate membership of NIB, will be on the 9th of September. And super excited about this one as well, Judy, because we have two of the leaders in terms of ND consultancies cooperating to mutual benefit for our community. So we have Genius Within and Lexic, who will be talking about the topic of neurodiversity at work strategy. So how do you start up a strategy for improving your workplace? Again, that's going to be on the 9th of September, and details will be on our LinkedIn page. So thank you, everyone. Really enjoyed the session. I think it was super insightful from Judy, and we'll see you all again soon. Take care.
Okay, bye everyone.